Imagine trying to draw lines on a map, but not just any map. This is a map of land you've finally reached, a promised land, and now you've got to divide it up fairly. Among all these different groups who need a home, it's a huge job.
Yeah, distributing everything, making sure everyone gets their share, their inheritance.
Exactly. And today we're really diving into the details of that, specifically in Joshua chapter 19.
hmm This is where the final pieces fall into place. After those first big land allocations, Chapter 19 deals with the rest, the remaining tribes getting their portions by lot. It's the wrap-up, filling in the gaps on the map.
Okay, so our mission here is to get a real handle on these specific inheritances, not just, who got what piece of land, but what can these locations, these lists of towns, tell us about the tribes themselves, their identity, maybe the challenges they faced.
Right. Trying to pull the meaning out of the geography. The text is pretty meticulous, describing this process overseen by Eleazar the priest, Joshua, and the tribal leaders. It all happens at Shiloh, which was the main center at the time where the tent of meeting was.
Right, Shiloh.
And chapter 19, it covers the lots for, let's see, the 2nd through the 7th tribes drawn, plus, interestingly, a special bit for Joshua himself at the very end. It basically marks the job as, well, finished.
Okay, let's unpack this then. The source says the second lot drawn was for Simeon, and their situation sounds quite different right from the start.
It really is. Simeon's inheritance wasn't like a big empty chunk of land waiting for them. The text is specific. Their inheritance lay within the territory of Judah.
Within Judah, so not their own separate area, like contiguous.
Not really, no. Their piece was basically carved out of the larger area already given to Judah. It's described as a collection of towns with their surrounding villages, but scattered inside Judah's borders.
Huh.
Yeah, places like Beersheba, Malada, Hormah, Ziklag, the list goes on. Initially, it mentions 14 towns plus their villages, though there might be some textual variations adding a few more later.
14 towns sort of sprinkled within another tribe's land that feels, well, unique. Does the text say why? Why was it done that way?
It does, and it's quite practical. It explains that Simeon's share came from Judah because, essentially, Judah's portion was more than they needed. Judah got a really big slice of the pie, maybe too big for their population at the time.
Oh, okay.
So Simeon's lot was carved out of that surplus.
That's really interesting. So the lot decided who was next, but then there was this practical adjustment based on, well, need and maybe the initial distribution being a bit oversized for Judah.
Exactly. It shows a bit of flexibility in the process.
So what would that have been like for Simeon then, living almost like islands within this much larger tribe, Judah?
Well, you can imagine their identity, their future, it's going to be inherently linked to Judah's. They wouldn't have that same sense of geographical separation or maybe autonomy that other tribes might have had. Their interactions, security, maybe even access to certain resources would likely be pretty interwoven with Judah. It's a really clear example of how these lines on the map weren't just lines, they shaped tribal dynamics profoundly.
Absolutely. Okay, moving on. The text says the third lot was for Zebulun. Where did they end up?
Zebulun gets territory up north, in the region we often call Galilee, just north of that big plain, the Jezreel Valley. The description of their boundary is pretty detailed, tracing it near Mount Tabor and heading towards the Sea of Galilee, though maybe not right on the shore.
Okay, and it lists towns like Kataph, Nahalal. Oh, and Bethlehem, but that's a northern Bethlehem, right? Not
Yeah.
the famous one down south.
Correct, yeah. Different Bethlehem. The text sums it up as 12 towns and their villages for Zebulun. So unlike Simeon, they get a solid block of land, a defined area, mostly hilly, fertile country.
So a more, let's say, standard allocation compared to Simeon being inside Judah.
Precisely. Then the fourth lot came up for Issachar.
And Issachar, where were they placed?
Issachar settled just south of Zebulun. Their territory was really centered on that huge, fertile plain of Jezreel. The source lists some key towns there. Jezreel itself, Shunem, and Ganim.
The Jezreel Valley. That's a really significant area historically, isn't it?
Hugely significant. Major crossroads for trade. For armies, control the valley, you control a lot. The text says Issachar got 16 towns and their villages. Their border touched Mount Tabor, like Zebulun's nearby, and reached the Jordan River on the east.
16 towns, right in the breadbasket of the region. What does that location suggest about Issachar, you think?
Well, on the one hand, probably a focus on agriculture, given how fertile it is. But on the other hand, it's vulnerable. Being at a major crossroads makes your land strategically vital, sure, but also a prime target for anyone wanting to control those routes.
Right.
So their inheritance put them right in the thick of things, geographically and probably politically too.
A very different feel from Simeon's scattered towns or Zebulun's hills.
Definitely. The fifth lot went to Asher, where their territory lie.
Asher got land way up north, running along the Mediterranean coast. The boundary description follows the coast and mentions reaching as far north as Greater Sidon.
Okay, now this is interesting. It lists towns within Asher, like Akshaph and Rehob. That's standard. But the fact that their boundary stretches up towards major Phoenician cities like Sidon and Tyre is nearby too, that's really significant.
Yeah, Phoenician territory.
The text says Asher had 22 towns and their villages.
22 towns, that's the biggest number we've heard so far for these tribes. And bordering Sidon and Tyre, what does that tell us about Asher's situation?
It immediately puts them right next door to a powerful, non-Israelite seafaring culture. Their land probably included the coastal plain and the foothills there in what's now Lebanon. It suggests maybe opportunities for trade, but also huge challenges in actually controlling that territory, especially near those strong coastal cities.
Right, cities they probably never fully subdued.
Likely not. So their location gave them this unique window onto the wider Mediterranean world, but also presented obstacles.
Fascinating. A big territory, but bordering major powers. That adds another layer.
It really shows the variety of situations these tribes found themselves in.
Okay, next up, the sixth lot. That went to Naphtali. Where were they?
Naphtali also got northern territory, but more inland, east of Asher. They got the hills and fertile areas west and north of the Sea of Galilee. Their boundaries also touch Mount Tabor and run along the Jordan River to the east.
And the text lists their cities,
Hmm.
but it specifically calls them fortified cities. Places like Ziddim, Hamath, Rakath, which is near the Sea of Galilee, possibly near later, Tiberias Hazor, Kadesh. 19 towns and their villages in total.
Yeah, that emphasis on fortified cities is telling, isn't it?
Mhm.
Being in those northern hills, bordering areas, maybe not fully controlled by Israel, near strategic spots like the Hula Valley and the routes going north towards Damascus, defense would have been crucial. Hazor, for instance, was a huge Canaanite stronghold that Joshua had supposedly conquered earlier. But maybe it remained a point of concern or needed refortifying.
So while Asher's looking out to sea and the Phoenicians, Naphtali is up in the hills, focused on securing their ground, holding these strong points. 19 towns, many fortified. It really paints a picture of their inheritance and the potential struggles.
Exactly. Their land provided strategic depth up there in the north.
Okay, finally. The seventh and last lot for the tribes. This one went to Dan.
Right, Dan. Now, their initial allocation, the one drawn by lot, was in the west. A strip of land kind of squeezed between Ephraim to the north, Judah to the south, and heading towards the coast. The text lists towns like Zorah, Eshtaol, Aijalon, Ekron, with their area facing the port city of Joppa.
That sounds like a pretty decent spot, actually, access towards the sea. But then the text throws in this little note, almost like a parenthesis, but it completely changes the story for Dan, doesn't it?
It's maybe the most striking part of the whole chapter, because it shows this clash between the plan and the reality. The source flat out states, but the Danites had difficulty taking possession of their territory. Yeah, big difficulty. So they went up and attacked Leshem, took it, put it to the sword, and occupied it. They settled in Leshem and named it Dan after their forefather.
Wait. So the land they were assigned by Lot, the whole divinely guided process at Shiloh, it didn't stick for Dan. They couldn't actually take hold of those places like Ekron and near Joppa.
That's exactly what it says. They ran into too much trouble, likely from the people already living there, think Philistines, maybe others in that really strategic coastal plain area. And their solution wasn't to just keep fighting there. They mounted this major expedition, traveled way up north, captured this city called Leshem or Lachish near the headwaters of the Jordan River, and basically moved their whole tribal center up there, renaming the city Dan.
Wow, that's a huge departure from the plan laid out by the lottery system. It really shows that, okay, the land was assigned, but actually living there, securing it, that was a whole different ballgame. It took human effort, and sometimes things turn out completely differently than the initial blueprint.
It's a powerful illustration of just how dynamic that settlement period was. The lot gave the divine nod, the ideal distribution, maybe. But human ability, resistance from others, just the sheer facts on the ground, they all played out within that. Dan's story is maybe the clearest example of the struggle involved in making that inheritance a concrete reality.
So after all 7 tribes get their lots, their areas are defined. The source mentions one last inheritance.
Yes, just at the end. It says, when they had finished dividing the land, the Israelites gave Joshua, son of Nun, an inheritance among them, as the Lord had commanded.
So Joshua, the leader who oversaw this whole incredibly complex division, he gets his piece last.
That's right. It wasn't part of the lottery for the tribes. It was a specific personal grant given to him by the people, following divine instruction, apparently. He asked for a town called Timnath-Serah, up in the hill country of Ephraim, which was his own tribe.
Right.
And the text adds that he built up the town and settled there.
There's something quite, well, fitting about that, isn't there? The leader waits until everyone else is sorted out before taking his own share.
Absolutely. It kind of highlights his focus on the task for the whole community. Completing the division for all the tribes came first. His own portion was like the final act, acknowledging his leadership in getting the job done, fulfilling the command to settle the land.
Okay, so to recap this whole massive process described across several chapters, but culminating here in chapter 19, the text sums it up. These are the territories that Eleazar the priest, Joshua son of Nun, and the heads of the tribal clans of Israel assigned by Lot at Shiloh in the presence of the Lord.
Right there at the entrance to the tent of meeting. And the key line that finishes this whole section is, and so they finished dividing the land. Chapter 19 really closes the book on the primary distribution task.
And understanding these specific territories, it really matters if you want to follow the story of Israel, doesn't it? This whole detailed, divinely guided division, it basically set the stage. It laid down the geographical foundation for the tribal identities, their later conflicts, their alliances. Everything that happens next in the biblical story is shaped by these boundaries.
Totally. These weren't just lines on parchment. They defined home, community, destiny for each tribe. It represents finishing this huge, complex job, turning the promise of land into a practical reality, town by town, border by border.
Yeah. Every landmark, every town listed connects a lineage to a specific place they were supposed to call home.
It's the realization of that settlement goal.
But then let's circle back to that really striking contrast we saw with Dan.
Yeah.
On one hand, you have this ideal plan, this careful division by Lot at Shiloh, guided by God, trying to give each tribe its proper place.
Right, the meticulous blueprint.
But then you see the messy, hard reality on the ground. Dan can't secure their assigned spot. They have to migrate, fight, carve out a new place entirely somewhere else. So what does that tension tell us? You know, the gap between the divine plan, the allocation by Lot, and the actual human struggle needed to possess and live in that promise.
That's a great question to chew on, I think. It seems the land wasn't just handed over, keys included, fully secured. Making it theirs required, well, courage, fighting, dealing with setbacks, and sometimes, like with Dan, a major adaptation from the original plan.
So the promise was there, but living it out involved real-world effort and challenges.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's that dynamic interplay. The divine promise is firm, but actually inhabiting it, living within those boundaries, that involved human action, struggle, and choices. A lot wasn't predetermined in practice.
Plenty to think about there. The plan was set, the lots were cast, the land assigned. But the actual story of settling in, living within those lines, that was really just beginning. Full of promise, yes, but also clearly full of struggle.